Bonjour à tous, my name's Alice and welcome back to my channel. Girl Boss Feminism, it started as a book published in 2014 by eBay seller to Nasty Gal CEO Sophia Amrosser and gave rise to a super large media trend with a bunch of new businesses, new brands, with that girl boss energy we all crave for. I'm joking, but still. Just to make sure we all agree on what a girl boss is, and actually it's quite funny because our fellow Urban Dictionary has two very different definitions for what a girl boss is. Either she's a woman in control, taking charge of her own circumstances in work and life. Someone who knows her worth and won't accept anything less. She's not a mean girl, in fact, she hates mean girls. She's empowering and inspiring to those around her. She kicks. Or she's a person who co-opts feminist girl power rhetoric as a way to virtue signal to other neoliberals and shield themselves from criticism. That's where we're at. Either people love the girl boss or they hate her, and a lot of us actually do both. Some say the girl boss era has ended, but we never really question when this whole thing really started. While the term girl boss is rather new, the background, the ideals and aspirations of the girl boss have a super long history. So let's go back in time, shall we? My husband left very early on when the war started, so I had to find a proper job and take care of the kids as well. It was quite challenging, I'm not gonna lie, but it also felt empowering, earn a living, serve the country. When he came back home, I just left him with the kids and went on to live my best life. Now I run a business with the girls I met during the war. We're having fun. During the Second World War, women were invited to join the workforce to compensate for the departures of men to war. For a lot of women, it was an opportunity to emancipate and leave the domestic sphere to serve the country. After the war ended, a lot of women were sent back home, yet many continued to work in industries or for the government. And the sense of purpose and financial empowerment they gained encouraged other women to start working too. By 1970, in the US alone, 50% of single women and 40% of married women were participating in the labor force. In her article for the Brookings Institute, expert Janet Yellen gave 3 potential reasons for that. First, with the advent of mass higher education, graduation rates rose substantially. Second, new technologies contributed to an increased demand for clerical workers, and these jobs were increasingly taken on by women. And finally, because those jobs tended to be cleaner and safer, the stigma associated with work for married women diminished. On top of that, new legislations were passed in the 1970s, and they protected women in the workplace. Among them, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act in 1978, the recognition of sexual harassment in the workplace, the increasing access to birth control, which allowed women to gain greater control over their lives, and also the right to apply for credit in their own name without a male cosigner. That was allowed in 1974 in the US, and I think it was 1965 in France, which is crazy, it's not that far away. These measures were the basis for the development of the working woman. This is where it all started. Progressively, becoming a working woman became quite cool. In liberal spheres, it was perceived as a form of emancipation from the rigid domestic structure, and so from men as well. But it doesn't stop there, because in the 1980s, a new aesthetic culture appeared, the yuppie culture. Yuppie stands for Young Urban Professional. It's basically the 80s version of the girl boss. The rise of the yuppie is coherent with the rise of neoliberalism, there's no such thing as society, there are individual men and women and their families. That was Thatcher. During that period, the concept of upward mobility or the American dream really shifted. It was no longer about you move from the working class to middle class or middle class to upper middle class. In fact, the yuppie culture popularized the self-made man, the self-made woman, so rising from rags to riches. Yet most of the films of that era, or that depicted that era, were centered around male characters, completely dismissing the impact the yuppie culture and neoliberalism had on women's lives as well. Women continued to increasingly join the labor force to reach high-paying jobs and to, live that urban yuppie lifestyle. When Harry Met Sally is a very good example of the blurring of the career self and the personal self that is characteristic of that era, and still is today. But finance and business primarily remained in the hands of men, And it's only very recently that women started to gain power in those areas. And that brings us to today's girl bosses. So it started as a desire to make women stand out, to recognize that there is something special about being a woman in business, because they are a minority. So yeah, the girl boss is still very much perceived by a lot of us as a valid form of female empowerment, despite its individualistic nature. And actually, whether it's Rosie the Riveter, the yuppie, or the girl boss, the celebration of working women has always had some anti-elite undertones. A good example of that, and something I've discussed in another video on The Crown, is the contrast between Thatcher, the middle-class meritocrat, and the Queen, the monarch. Despite her conservative views, Thatcher had a class consciousness the Queen did not have. The yuppies, the girl bosses, tend to carry with them that class consciousness as they rise in society. In the 60s, 70s, the professional managerial class was caricatured by the right as that college-educated liberal elite bent on imposing its version of socialism on everyone else. And obviously, these are criticisms we're still here today. Another positive characteristic of the PMC is that it really acted as an engine for gender mobility. In fact, the girl boss is an example of both social and gender mobility. What I mean by that is by increasing their representation in traditional men's spheres, women really challenge those rigid hierarchies and gender politics within professional spheres in general. Representation matters. No, I'm not married. I work as a journalist for a very prestigious newspaper in New York. I really love my job. I wish one day I could create my own newspaper or magazine to help women navigate their professional world and become true leaders. I wish I could become a leader one day. Women's exclusion from the workforce was coherent with the idea of separate spheres, meaning that women and men have different biological characteristics, and that's why they have different roles in society. So women are emotional, they are carers, they're not suited for intense labor, whereas men are providers, they are strong, and they are suited for very hard labor. That is how we were and are still being socialized, and for those reasons, the working world is a men's world. It uses men's language, men's cards. And while female representation in the workplace had a positive impact on their rights, but also the betterment of their work environment, while their success still very much coincides with their ability to adapt to, but also to adopt a male rhetoric or behavior. In her book Invisible Women, researcher Criado-Perez argued that the language, pronouns, and imagery used in competitive, managerial type of job advertisement on platforms like LinkedIn are more palatable to men than women, which results in less women applying for those jobs. Women have been socialized to believe that competitiveness or an exacerbated confidence aren't female traits. And I insist on the word socialized. The fact that a woman boss is infantilized as a girl boss speaks volumes. Former Facebook CEO Sheryl Sandberg is a good example of how the girl boss trend was meant to go wrong. Sold as half a self-help book, half a feminist manifesto, Lean In encouraged women to believe in themselves and told them that they could have it all if they were willing to put in the efforts to adapt to an unfamiliar environment, because she did it. She refused to lean back. She certainly had good intentions, she recognized that women have it harder. Yet money and power corrupt, and so after spending a good amount of time holding powerful positions, women started to emulate the toxic behavior that have always existed in business or managerial spheres, hurting other women in the process. It was reported to be the case for Sofia Amoruso, who coined the term girl boss, and Sandberg got caught up in a few scandals as well. Generally speaking, people hate to have a female boss, and especially women, not because they do not do a good job, but because the type of behavior they try to emulate goes against the idea we might have of a working woman, so a nurturing, caring, compassionate individual. Women are supposed to be inherently good. But in order to succeed, the girl boss has to put her ego first. Despite her good intentions and her desire to uplift women, the girl boss has to immerse herself into the egomania that is characteristic of the neoliberal system. We women have everything in our power to become leaders. I became a CEO because I refused to lean back. I took risks. Women don't take risks. I wish I could hire more women. But I need confident, assertive individuals. And if women aren't willing to step up and show up for themselves, like I did, well, I have to run a business. Just go and ask men to hire more women. I can't take on that burden. Despite the persistence of the professional managerial class, sorry, it tells a lot actually. Professional managerial class, yuppie culture and the girl boss trend were very short term, and that's something I found very interesting. In fact, the appeal for those trends reflected in the pop culture production of those times. There are countless films on the American yuppies of the 80s, and the girl boss trend is pretty much everywhere in TV series, films, and especially on social media. Yet very quickly, positive representations shifted to social commentaries, criticizing the egomania of those trends. A movie like American Psycho, based on Bret Easton Ellis' book, showcases the silent violence and loss of identity that hyper-normative, hyper-competitive environments foster. In the movie, Patrick Bateman, a 27 years old Wall Street golden boy, is handsome, rich, intelligent, and social, yet in private, when he comes back home, he happens to be a psychopath. He has a profound disgust for poor people, homosexuals, and even women. Recently, the movie I Care a Lot, directed by Jay Blakeson, the film follows Marla, a con woman who makes a living as a court-appointed guardian, thus seizing the assets of vulnerable, elderly people. Just as with American Psycho, the film exposes the dual personality of the girl boss, her exacerbated narcissism, and, as Don Foster argued, her compartmentalized ethics. The rapid fall of the appeal for yuppie culture or the girl boss shows that progressive ideals, whether they are social or gender mobility, feminism or inclusivity, aren't really compatible with neoliberalism. The story of the girl boss or yuppie culture is a story of betrayal. They have progressively lost their sense of class consciousness. They have lost their sense of authenticity or relatability to those who are keen on those type of trends, so working class or middle class people, and eventually lost their support and became the targets of mockery, harsh criticism, or social commentaries. And as Barbara and John Ehrenreich asks, should we mourn the fate of the professional managerial class, so the yuppies or the girl boss, or rejoice that there is one less smug, self-styled elite to stand in the way of a more egalitarian future? The girl boss pitfall ultimately leads us to think about the way we structure classes. We talked about the working class, the middle class, the PMC and the elites, as if they were on a scale, on different levels that you have to unlock. As if each class had a specific set of characteristics that makes it different from the other ones. But the aspirations of the working class, middle class, and the PMC are actually the same. We want a decent place to live, we want to be healthy, we want to have a fulfilling job, and to have time for hobbies. From there, we have two very different options. Either we try to elevate ourselves to get as close as possible to the elites, with very little chance of actually reaching them. Maybe own a house at 40, maybe put some money into stocks for retirement. Or we go the other way. We decide to stand together, not as members of different social classes, but as individuals who want and deserve the right to a decent, healthy, and fulfilling life. But if we want to do that, then many things are gonna have to change. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, we can continue that discussion in the comment section. So don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe if it's not done already. And yeah, I'll see you next week. Salut!